what is the connection between Affinity and Fethullah Gülen?
Well, I had the opportunity, thanks to the generosity of Affinity, to meet Fethullah Gülen several years ago in the United States, where he was in Philadelphia. My interest in Gülen and the work of Affinity came through my 30 years as a journalist of religion, where one had watched religion as practiced in Australia in slow decline. In Fethullah Gülen, you saw somebody who was profoundly religious, but said your religious thoughts must be intimately connected to your religious actions. And those actions can't be tainted by violence, which is profoundly at its heart anti-religious. The spirit of religion conveyed in the words of religion is about acts of peace and generosity. Now, I thought to myself, that's interesting because it applies across religious groups and has enabled the building of civil society. And it turns out that Gülen himself is not just a man out of the blue. He comes from a tradition of Muslim thinkers who had begun to think about this 60, 80 years before. The most significant is a guy called Syed Nursi. Syed Nursi is one of those who said for religion to sustain itself, it must take modernity seriously, particularly science. And to do that, education is profoundly important. You've got to be intellectually well read and scientifically articulate. And Gülen emerges as somebody who takes what Nursi's saying and applies it. Gülen begins to say, I begin with education. Young people must be well educated in faith and science and civic ethics and in their own spirituality. And so we get Gülen emerging in the 1950s and 60s with an education movement that has spread itself around the world.
Take me through that impact further. What was his impact on all these areas around the world?
Just in concrete terms, there is now a network across 160 countries of schools committed to those foundational values, science, education, and peace through action. The other thing about it that's extraordinarily interesting is the way in which the movement that sprang out of Gülen's work, called Hizmet, means one word, service. And it's intimately connected to education being about, ultimately, service to humanity, to civil society. This is sprung out of a Muslim tradition, but a Muslim tradition that is comfortable with the intellectual movements of East and West. Gülen himself grew in a Turkish community, but he's familiar with the Western intellectual tradition. He sees intellectual tradition and the pursuit of science as part of the knowledge of mankind gifted by God. This is the sort of stuff that's profoundly important in the maintenance of a civil society, where faith traditions can talk to each other. Now, Affinity was able to push that even further. Here in Sydney, for example, we have civil schools in Sydney, coming under the influence of the Hizmet movement, but also a night like tonight. And also, over the past few years, not recently, post-COVID, but up until COVID, Affinity was sponsoring lectures, public lectures in Sydney, surrounding efforts in civil society. And many here would have been to some of those lectures that were running over the years, not seeking to sort of beat religion around anybody's ears or sell a particular product, but to actually discover who we were. And it's a reflective of the influence of Rumi on Gülen as well.